Welcome to the Central Bank of Kuwait's podcast, where the objective is to raise awareness on key economic concepts and developments which affect the lives of individuals and society as a whole. I am Sabah Deshti from the Central Bank of Kuwait. Keen to protect customer rights, specifically those granted consumer or housing loans, and to ensure the integrity of services provided to customers, on January 19, 2011, the Central Bank of Kuwait issued instructions to all banks and financing companies subject to its supervision and investment companies granting loans or financing services concerning the establishment of Consumer Protection Unit to resolve customer complaints. In today's episode, our guest Dalal Al-Mullah from CBK will explain the procedures customers should take to protect their rights in dealing with CBK-regulated banks or other entities. Welcome, Dalal. Let's begin directly. If a customer didn't receive the requested service, or if there was a mistake or any other issue, what recourses does the customer have? What can they do to resolve the issue?
Thank you for having me, and welcome everybody to today's discussion, where I'm sure that today's topic will add a lot of value to many of the listeners. So to start with, and as you mentioned in the introduction, the Central Bank of Kuwait's instructions are very clear regarding the process for handling customer complaints against any CBK-regulated entity, such as banks, financial companies, and even investment companies that are granting loans and any financial service. Now, the role of this unit is to study the customer complaints and review all procedures taken by the entity to resolve the complaint, whether it's related to loans, financing, cards, or any other services provided to the customer. This unit as well is responsible for addressing any errors, in addition to ensuring that the integrity of the entity's procedures are correct, and finally, informing the customer formally of the bank or the company's response to his or her complaint. Therefore, in the event of any complaint, a customer should not hesitate to fill out the designated complaint form that's made available at all branches of banks and even the mentioned entities. The form would also be available on their websites as well. Now, to put this to action, the customer should submit the complaint to the entity against which the complaint is filled, whether it's the bank or the company, for review. It's also very important that the customer obtains an acknowledgement receipt of the complaint along with the date of the complaint which was received. This is because the Central Bank of Kuwait instructs and obligates these entities to respond officially in writing to the complaint within 15 business days from the filing date. Now, during this period, what happens is that the entity against which the complaint is filed becomes obligated to review the complaint and take the appropriate corrective measures. In all cases, the entity is obligated to respond and specify whether the corrective measures had been taken regarding the subject matter, or they will be indicating the property of measures that they will take regarding the incident indicated in the complaint.
Let's say the entity claims that its procedures are correct, yet the customer is confident that there is an error. Or if the customer received an unsatisfactory response, what should the customer do in that situation?
That's a very good question and a realistic scenario too. If the customer is not satisfied with the response that's been given by the concerned entity, in this case, the customer can log an appeal with the Central Bank of Kuwait directly by attaching a copy of the response and all the necessary documents. These documents include the original complaint and the acknowledgement receipts. It now becomes the role of the Central Bank of Kuwait to assess the correctness of the measures that's been applied by the bank or the company, or lack of measures, in which any case, the Central Bank of Kuwait will obligate the concerned entity to correct the error appropriately. Such errors can include returning any fees or any money that's been unlawfully deducted by the entity.
So we have discussed the process related to filing complaints against banks, financing, and investment companies. What about filing complaints against exchange companies?
Regarding filing complaints against exchange companies, customers should visit the Central Bank of Kuwait's main building officially during the official business hours to submit a complaint against these exchange companies using the designated form that's available in the banking hall at our premises. Our working hours are from Sunday to Thursday from 8:30 to 1 o'clock. In this case, the Central Bank of Kuwait will also assess the correctness of the measures applied by the company or lack of measures as well, and obligates the concerned company to correct the error if needed.
Are there cases in which the Central Bank of Kuwait receives complaints directly?
Yes, of course, there are other cases or scenarios. So if we take an example or two, if there is a customer that's complaining against an entity and this entity is refusing to receive the complaint, this is one situation. Another example is if the entity fails to respond within the specific time period that we talked about, the 15 business working days. In this case, the customer can visit the banking hall at the Central Bank of Kuwait's headquarters to submit a customer complaint. I just need to point out one thing because it's very important to clarify that the procedures we just mentioned are related to individual customer complaints at banking entities or financial services or investment companies. However, when it comes to the corporate customer complaints, we encourage these customers to visit the banking hall at the Central Bank of Kuwait's headquarters directly to submit a complaint. Also, something that's really worth noting since we are on topic, that the Central Bank of Kuwait provides simplified instructions such as infographics across its social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter, and even on our website, where customers can visit our social media accounts or our website to follow the steps to submitting a customer complaint form.
If a customer of an entity regulated by the Central Bank of Kuwait has inquiries regarding services or products, how can they communicate with the Central Bank of Kuwait in this regard?
Yes, of course. The Central Bank of Kuwait receives customer inquiries through the Consumers Protection Unit, reachable during the official business hours at 186 4444.
Could you provide our audience with advice from experiences of the Customer Protection Unit?
Yes, of course. I would like to stress the importance of how the customer should have sufficient knowledge of any obligations arising from obtaining any banking product or services, such as loans or credit cards, as well as any effect that these may have on their future commitment of the client. So let's take an example. If a customer decides to retire over a year or two, he or she must bear in mind that his monthly income or salary will decrease. So any financial lending or borrowing decision must be considered for the future plans. Consider another example. Let's say if a customer plans to get married and rent a house, their borrowing decision must be considered for their ability to pay off the loan, especially if the loan repayment period is a long-term loan, not short. This is why it's very important to read any contract thoroughly. The Central Bank of Kuwait requires all banks to give a period of no less than 2 business days, for the customer to review the contract and understand the arising obligations before signing it. The Central Bank instructions in regards to loans and financing are available on our website as well for the audience information to look at. Last but not least, as we are closing on a very important note, I would like to point out the importance of keeping all your banking data confidential and not disclosing any information to any person around you, even if they claim to be a bank employee. We ask that you become very alert of the fake phone calls that's been happening and the rise of fake WhatsApp calls even, requesting financial data. Please keep your information safe and secure and confidential. And one last reminder, we would just like to remind everybody that the steps of submitting a complaint form are available on the Central Bank of Kuwait's official website as well as our social media platforms.
Many thanks to Dalal Al-Mullah for joining us today. This brings us to the end of our podcast. Thank you for listening.